Friends, we are gathered here at difficult times because the outcome in Caracas is still not clear. Let's be frank. Very few people know which way this coup by the United States is going to go, how they will react if the elected government hangs on to power, and how they will, whether they have a plan B for toppling it, because plan A has been exposed before the world for what it is. It's blatant, so blatant and crude that it beggars the imagination that anyone watching the BBC or reading The Guardian or any other newspaper can take this seriously. And that is, I think, important to start off with, because the role that the mainstream media has played in creating this image, both of this right-wing thug, Juan Guaido, that's what he is. We now have coming out information about him, how he was trained in the United States, how the groups he was involved with were given US backing, how the laboratories in which they were shown previous experiments of similar events, both in Mexico and in the United States, how they were taken there, how the tweets that Guaido put up himself dressed in military clothing during the violent period when they were attacking hospitals in Caracas, when they were threatening Maduro with the same fate that befell Gaddafi, who was sodomized to death under the benign gaze of NATO troops, and saying we're going to do the same to Maduro. All this stuff is coming out, and within a year or two, it'll be available to anyone. But what has been happening in South America, the change in US imperial strategy, is this, that whereas in the past they would simply organize a military coup and that would be it, topple the regime of Salvador Allende in Chile, the socialist regime, impose Pinochet, kill 20,000 or so people, kill intellectuals, let the people who can escape go into exile, they didn't care. They did the same in Brazil, they did the same in Bolivia, they did the same in Panama, they did it in many other places. But this is not too popular these days and a bit difficult to defend. So what they're going for now, effectively, if you look at how they've been operating since the victory of Hugo Chavez in the last year of the previous century, is to work by utilizing, corrupting, debasing the actually existing institutions of democracy in all these countries and use them to try and topple governments. They did it in Paraguay, they did it in Honduras, and we know the impact this has had on the population in Honduras, the numbers of activists and ordinary people who have been killed. They did it over a 2.5-year period, more or less, in Brazil. The imprisonment of Lula, the coup, constitutional coup against Dilma, the street mobilizations carried out by the Brazilian far right, the refusal to release Lula from prison or to permit Lula, the most popular politician in the country, from contesting the elections, justified by Sergio Moro, the chief judge, praised by the entire liberal media in the West as an honest judge, who declared Bolsonaro to be a moderate politician and is currently being rewarded with what? He is now the Minister of Justice in the new Bolsonaro government in Brazil. This is the reality. And this has been organized by who? It's been organized by the United States, who were distracted by the Arab crises and by waging war on the Arab world, which they carry on doing, one should say. But they've now found time over the last few years to re-engage with South America with disastrous effects. That is what we are seeing. The Brazilian story, of course, is a huge defeat for the left and for the working class movement in Brazil. The Workers' Party was the last big social democratic workers' party to be built in the world. This party has more or less been destroyed. So in the face of this, so we have to see what is happening in Venezuela in the light of all this. In Mexico, they rigged the last two elections to prevent López Obrador's victory. This election was impossible to rig because the anger of the people had built up to such an extent that they poured out to make sure that López Obrador had a majority on every single institution that exists in that country. Parliamentary, and his own victory was huge, just to make sure it was not going to be easy, that no rigging could take place. So that's been one victory that we have won. But by and large, the United States has been successful in institutional coups against the countries I've mentioned. Tragically, the government of Ecuador under Moreno was simply bought off. I mean, it's corruption on a mega scale, and not the entire story hasn't yet come out on how they did it, how they maneuvered, the institutions they used, but it's a terrible story. And they do it because they think it's more successful. And people in this country should know that the campaigns they wage, the media campaigns, the so-called Human Rights Watch campaigns, are all now part and parcel of what they do. I mean, we have had a small example of it in the campaign waged against Jeremy Corbyn by the British media. If you think about it, it is an astonishing campaign against a leader of the opposition in this country who has been elected and re-elected by his own party, which is now one of the largest mass parties in Europe as a result of these campaigns. And yet they go on and on and on. He's a friend of Chavez. A BBC showed a documentary not so long ago attempting to tarnish the reputation of Chavez, and of course a picture of Corbyn with Venezuelan leaders. So it goes on non-stop. And against this we fight as best we do, you know, with our pens, with our voices, with our solidarity. But it's important to understand why they are doing it. And the reason why they're doing it is because we live in a world where they can no longer accept, and haven't been able to accept, any challenge to the imperial system from anywhere. They thought with the collapse of the Soviet Union and that whole world order, they would be able to have it their own way always. And when they can't have it because new movements arise, like the Bolivarians were one such movement, and they assert two things. What I would describe these governments as, none of them has been, strictly speaking, a revolutionary government on the style of the 20th century. Most of them have been elected governments, and elected left social democratic governments, radical social democrats with a mass base which mobilizes. That is what these regimes have been. But one thing they have imposed their control on is how their own resources are used. And Venezuela was a big, big example for that, not just in South America, but all over the world. For working people, for trade unions, saying that these things could still happen, that these things could be done. And they wanted to destroy this example. And of course, linked to that was Hugo Chávez's assertion in a very bold, brash even, courageous way of Venezuelan sovereignty. He told me once that after he'd attacked Bush directly at a meeting of the United Nations Assembly, how large numbers of Arab leaders and others came to him privately, shook his hands, and thanked him because they couldn't do it. And so this attempt to assert national sovereignty has been extremely important. And those who, in the name of a so-called cosmopolitanism, want to say that we should completely ignore sovereignty are crazy, because that is caving into the global social order. That is the argument they use. They do not like nation states because nation states still can exercise, where they exist, a certain degree of sovereignty which prevents them from pushing all their plans through. That is what has been going on with the Bolivarian governments. That is what has been going on in the Middle East with the way the empire, the American empire and its allies work. What do? Think about it, if you look. Destroy any country with sovereignty, which has a strong military force, and balkanize it. Create little enclaves. Of course, the Israelis have done it in Palestine, though there even the enclaves don't have any sovereignty. But in Iraq, in Syria, this is exactly what they've been doing, and they want to do it to Iran as well. So in South America, they just want to just get rid of regimes which challenge them. I mean, people who talk about the neutrality of the American mass media, Bill Maher, a popular sort of semi-comedian in more senses than one, who has a chat show, declared, yeah, we were right in Venezuela. Why the hell shouldn't we take back our own backyard? This is the mentality of quite a lot of people there, regardless of whether they're Trump supporters or Democrats. I mean, the coup in Honduras was organized by Obama and Hillary Clinton. Trump carries on in his own weird way, and appoints sort of even worse people, like the appointment of Elliot Abrams, a convicted criminal, to be in charge of Venezuela is actually quite apt, because only criminals can run this country for the United States. They've done it before in Nicaragua, in the Contra War. They've done it even prior to that in backing Pinochet in Chile. So why not try and create an ultra-right-wing regime in Venezuela, get your companies to take the oil, neoliberalize the country, and that is what is known as order and stability. Well, it won't last. It will last for some time if they succeed. And that is why we must try and do our best to ensure that it doesn't succeed. But this is